We've had some legendary actors and directors on the show over the last 20 years. When I sit down for an interview, my goal is to get the subject to reveal parts of him or herself that you've never heard before. Here are a few of those men and women who've entertained us and brought joy to our lives over the years.
My sister's child was close to death.
You are an adoptive parent.
Yes.
Tell me how that experience governed the choices of this role. Did it affect at all the way you approached this role of Jean Valjean?
It's a good question. I forget that I'm an adoptive parent. I think the thing that Victor Hugo talks about and Tom Hooper really wanted to exacerbate in this story of Jean Valjean is that when he takes care of this young kid, who's an 8-year-old girl called Cosette, his heart completely opens up and he experiences love, unconditional love, for the first time in his life. Now, it's not the first time in my life I've experienced that, but when I adopted my kids, I can't imagine there being any difference between being an adoptive parent or biological parent. There is something about the open, trusting, loving souls, natural souls of kids that just demand that of you. And there's no doubt that for me, as a parent, playing Jean Valjean, particularly that second half, or if I think about that final scene, very easy for me to connect to those feelings.
Yeah, and you could feel it. I mean, there's a depth in your performance here that is just extraordinary.
Thanks.
Now, do you hear what they're saying out there?
No.
Do you hear the people say Academy Awards for Hugh Jackman? Do you hear that? You hear the buzz, Hugh.
Well, you got to make lyrics rhyme at least.
Well, I'll do it. Okay. Do you hear the Academy bringing awards to Hugh Jackman? Huh?
It's closer.
It's close enough.
Not too bad.
What was it about that group of people and that time that made the Carol Burnett show work?
Well, we were all alcoholics,
Oh,
so
that's a good start.
Gave us certain relaxation to the show. I guess it was the rhythm of the show, and Harvey and I were the best of friends, and Carol is the most generous person you can imagine, and so we never had any problems with a star going, I'll say that, and she was always willing to share the show, and I think that's what made it so good. I didn't necessarily want to do the show, but she said, you know, you better come in and
Or she was going to recall the loan.
Yeah.
We're in luck. It's the mating season. What's the matter with you, beauty?
What was it like? You've had such amazing partnerships over the years. What was it like working with Harvey Korman? What was it about his particular straight man to your wacky, uncontrollable self that made those scenes crackle and work?
Well, Harvey was probably the most intelligent person I have ever met. I mean, he knew everything about everything, but the man could not tie his own shoes. So I could put him on rather easily. And I would tell him things that had no way of being true, and he would buy them. So whenever I had the opportunity, I would stab him. And
usually when a camera was rolling.
oh, yes.
You have called yourself an emotional detective when you approach a role. What does that mean?
I read the words, and then I try to read between the lines, you know, because I know behavior. You know, I understand what loss is and pain, and I've seen dysfunction, and so I look for those things, and I look how they can fit in this screenplay, because you know, my job as an actor is to become seamless for the person who's watching. You know, I know I have my name, I've been in movies, and at a certain point, you know, the hope is that you just quit watching me.
And what's the mark you want to leave for your audience, for your family?
You're talking about my headstone.
I guess.
You know, so maybe
a goal. We call it a goal.
But maybe if somebody looked at my name and saw that, and it said, and he made movies too,
You said, this was just not very long ago, the single most difficult job of your career was playing Mr. Rourke. Why did you say that?
The thing that was difficult about it was that if you ask any actor what is the most difficult thing to do, is exposition, where you set the stage for somebody else. In Fancy Island, I couldn't become involved emotionally. I couldn't express any kind of strong emotions because I was the perfect host. Welcome to Fantasy Island.
Smiles, everyone,
Smiles,
I remember.
right. And I was a perfect host and in control. Never in doubt that I could solve any control. Therefore, who is that boss? Well, that's me, so-and-so. What's her fantasy, boss? Well, her fantasy is that when she was a child, her mother took away a little doll, and then the little doll has become a symbol of the love of her mother, and the mother is dead, and she would like to be able to get the little doll again. You see, now, that is very uninteresting to say. You cannot, you've got
Fascinating for the audience, difficult as an actor.
Well, because you have to, the audience can go, unless you imbue it with interest, vitality, a little inventiveness. Her mother said, I never was involved in things of love or passion or anything. You see, it was very difficult to do. For 7 years I did that. That's very tough.
My final question.
Yeah.
How do you want to be remembered?
God, that's difficult.
That's why I asked it.
I would like to be remembered simply as a man who, having had many weaknesses, tried to conquer them and never gave up trying to conquer them. He never conquered them all, but he always tried to conquer them.
The acting bug bit you awfully early. In parochial
I've always
school.
been. Yeah, Sister Delrina got the full effect when I would come in, having memorized Barbra Streisand albums, would come and announce that I would like to perform the entire album for the class of second graders. So I'm up there doing these Barbra Streisand kind of honky-tonk cabaret songs,
While Sister's veil is curling in the back of the room, right?
That's right.
You have the ability to turn on a dime, and there are very few actresses that have the facility you have to be in the midst of a comedic moment and turn to pathos in a heartbeat. How do you do that? How do you work?
Because the comedy, it comes out of pain. I mean, most of the situations, if you look at that we do on the show, are very funny, but they're extremely painful for the people involved. So, and that's why I think you find a lot of comedians have very difficult backgrounds, and the way they deal with it is to be funny and to entertain. In fact,
Is that how you deal with it?
well, I just happen to be terribly gifted.
Early in the show's history, we sat down with Carroll O'Connor in what turned out to be his last broadcast interview. Naturally, we discussed his inspiration for All in the Family's Archie Bunker and why that beloved character has touched generations.
I never knew Archie growing up. I grew up in a well-to-do family. Catholic family, by the way, and Archie, as you may remember, was anti-Catholic. There were Archies all around me in the community. Most of the working people I knew were Archie Bunkers. And how did I prepare for that? Well, I was a good mimic. Always a good mimic. My mother was a very good mimic. She could do all these New York types of, she could do the working girls, My mother used to have us in stitches. She'd do a girl. If my father knew that I was going out with that guy, he would die. So we'd hear all this, and we'd hear the guys do. So I was able to do Archie, the voice there. And I took a lot of that voice from Jackie Gleason, the Lord have mercy on him, who was a kind of a pal of mine. I didn't know him too well. I took some from Jimmy Cagney, who was a pal of mine.
Oh, really?
And I took kind of a walk I took from Wallace Beery.
Okay.
So I put together elements of these wonderful actors. I stole shamelessly from them, and you cannot lampoon the character you're playing. You cannot laugh at the character you're playing. You cannot be aware that he's funny as an actor. you have to play him intensely, and you have to play him fiercely and angrily, and that's what makes him funny.
Hey, man, will you look at me standing here? Will you look at that poor face on me here? How many times did I beg on hands and knees never use my razor?
If you could write for me the final line of the Carroll O'Connor story, what would that line be?
Think of me kindly, friends. I didn't mean it.
And then there was Stritch, Elaine Stritch. The legendary star of stage and screen was by far the most difficult interview I have ever done. She was cantankerous, struggling with diabetes, and on the edge, to say the least, at the time. Elaine insisted that we interview her right before her nightclub act in New York. She was nervous, she wouldn't apply makeup nor herself to this interview, and well, God rest her soul, we just didn't click.
Let's turn the mics on, or you won't get anything worthwhile.
I've seen you, I have to say, since I was about that big, all these years. I just saw you the other night here at the Cafe Carlisle. Did you imagine?
Did you ever hear any of the jokes about Betty Davis? I've loved you ever since. Wait a minute. I haven't asked you the question yet. When Betty Davis said, when somebody comes up to her and says, I've loved you ever since you should know better than that. You're hip enough to know better than Elaine, I have seen you ever since I was. Boy, are you looking for a.
I'm sorry, I'm guilty as charged.
Unbelievable. I mean, you're the proof positive of what all those jokes are based on.
Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you. Yes, right back at you.
I deserved
Thanks
it.
a lot.
You're absolutely right. You work with the great Noel Coward, who you were cast in his plays when you were, what, 18 years old? You were in one of his plays,
He came to
Private
see
Lives?
me in my first big musical in Philadelphia because he'd heard that I was good from the conductor, the great conductor. What's his name? The famous conductor. West Side Story. Bernstein.
Leonard Bernstein.
Who said that?
Chris.
What do you do for a living?
He's my producer.
Yeah, well, you're his producer. Oh, good. I'm glad it isn't the other way around. You're where you belong.
Thank you, Elaine.
That's all right.
We need help, that's why. He needs my help.
Good.
Stritch finally kicked the drinking habit following a diabetic attack that nearly took her life in 1988. But when I tried to get her to explain how she wrestled the alcoholism into submission, she would have none of it.
I don't want to talk about drinking. Yeah. Drinking was a problem because I liked it too much.
But
I quit it.
You overcame it.
Well, that's all right, but I don't want to talk about that either.
Because I think it's a fascinating part of your story, how you overcame.
Well, maybe so. Someday we'll do an interview about booze. I'm not going to do it now, this close to the show.
Okay.
It's too complicated, and it's too in detail.
How do you want to be remembered? As a performer, as an individual?
As somebody who cares enough about her career and entertaining an audience so that she can level with her interviewer before the show that she's got to go. That's how I want to be remembered.
That's how you'll
tell
be
the
remembered.
truth. How about that?
Thank you, Joanne.
All right. It was nice meeting you, nice talking to you, and now let go of me.
You're gone.
All right.
And she is gone. This next man is one of my favorite people to interview, not because he's an easy interview, far from it, but he's always unflinchingly honest, brilliant, and very funny. I spoke with him and actor Jim Caviezel before and during the making of Mel Gibson's 2004 blockbuster, The Passion of the Christ.
I was, hooked into the cross, pinioned in.
How long were you there?
On the cross? We did first day was phenomenal. The weather was going perfect. We had everything right. And I mean, it was right to the end where, put the spear into his side. I mean, the cross was moving back and forth. The wind was blowing. It just looked like the end of it all. And when we went and watched dailies, Mel goes, it's terrible. We got to do this again. I said, why? What are you kidding me? Why? He says, because the cross is moving too much. If the cross is moving too much, they're not watching my Jesus. They're watching that cross. I want them watching Jesus. So we end up doing that again, but for 5 more weeks. 5 more weeks of that. And that was just that part. And then we had the scourging.
It's going to be graphic, and it's going to be accurate as I can make it. It has areas of poetic license that I've added to it that I see as not unreasonable.
Now, some would say, why do you have to be so graphic? That removes the art. That kills the imagination that we can all apply to this.
No,
by being so on the nose, Mel.
No, it's a puzzle that I have. I think what I have to do is be truthful to take you through suffering with it. The audience has to suffer to understand it more. And what I'm seeking here is a deeper understanding of this event. And as well as being graphic and probably in your face a little bit, it's not always like that. I mean, I use a certain art to get around some of that. And I think that even in the more horrific aspects of it, I've tried to incorporate a beauty to it.
I mean, I have a sense you're going to go through the blades a few times on this one.
Oh, you think so?
I bet.
Julienne, diced?
Yes.
Ginsued?
Ginsued, chopped, and fricasseed.
Fricasseed, oh good. I can hardly wait.
If what I'm hearing from my peers is true.
Shut up.
I know.
You're scaring me, Raymond.
I'm not trying to scare you. I just want to.
All right. Oh, you know, hey, so what? You only live once.
You're willing to take the shot.
Yeah, you might as well get. It won't be boring.
No, it won't be boring.
It won't be boring.
Just a few months ago, we talked about Gibson's filmmaking technique and how he likes to tell stories before a live audience. Talk to me about some of those moments. There, as I said, there's an aesthetic. You change speeds when you're in these violent scenes. Why do you slow things down and then you suddenly hasten them?
Well, I don't know.
What are you trying to?
Did I slow stuff? Maybe.
There's a few of those moments.
There's a lot of moments. There's a lot of tricks. There's.
I know. I want you to tell me some of them.
Well,
I know. I see your tricks. I just don't know how you got there.
There's tempos and rhythm, and I mean, I used to tell my kids a story, right? And I'd get them like, I'd go real quiet, and I'd get them all quiet and telling them the story and talk about the dark and how they didn't know what was out there, but there must have been something in the dark staring at them because they could feel the eyes on them. And they'd all be sort of listening to this really, and I do that, right? And it's like, and they dive out of their skins, right? So it's...
Have a chocolate.
Yes, right, thank you.
That was a good one.
More chocolate.